Good to go? All right. Can everybody hear me okay? Pretty
Hmm.
good? Awesome. Okay. Hi, everybody. My name is Henry Murphy. I'm an alcoholic. My sobriety date is August 26, 2011. I'm a member of a home group. It's a Miami group. And when we're not, I don't know what, are we in the Twilight Zone? When we're not in this and we're meeting live, we meet Monday nights at 8 p.m. down in the middle of Miami in this little neighborhood called Brickell. Some of you may have been there. We meet at 609 Brickell Avenue. Big speaker meeting. It's kind of an all-night affair. You'll find the first of us showing up around 6:30 to make the coffee, and the last rides are being given home to newcomers after fellowship and dinner and so on, closer to midnight. And we also have a book traditions concept study on Thursday nights. That's in Edgewater, which is like 15th and Biscayne. And we wanted to establish ourselves as a Three Legacies group. So we go through all that stuff. I have a sponsor. I sponsor sponsors, and I love Alcoholics Anonymous. Wasn't always that way, right? In fact, I was a guy when I came here. I was opposed to AA. I was opposed to pretty much everything that I wrongly thought AA was. I was opposed to all of my misunderstandings of this, and I'll share a little bit about that. But I want to thank Phil. Thanks so much, man, for inviting me out to hang out with you guys. And Stephen, it's been great meeting you and connecting. And the Canadian Army, led by Lil, I guess came on tonight. That's awesome, and just good to see so many friends. And give me a soapbox and a reason, and I'll start to express my opinions about things, including my opinions about Zoom and so on. But the truth is, the net effect has been some great connections. Although I will tell you that I am absolutely certain that I have at times during this process, from around, I think, the first week or second week in March, when we got the news they were closing our Monday night group, to today, I've drawn on the insurance, like Dr. Bob talks about, the idea that I can take out a little bit of insurance against the next. I've drawn on insurance from the actions, from the sponsorship family, from all the spiritual actions I've taken reluctantly over the years. I've had to draw on that during this time. And as a result, I'm still standing, and I'm here with you guys tonight. What I'll venture to do in the time that I have is share with you the only thing I have of any value, and that's my experience. My experience as a guy who would go in and out of Alcoholics Anonymous for a little over half a decade. I would come here, and I would, based on what I observed or what I thought was going on, I began to develop this belief, sort of deep down, that while all of you, or most of you, there's always, a couple bad apples in every bunch, but most of you were nice to me. Most of you were welcoming. Most of you were glad that I was here. But while most of you were well-meaning people, the conclusions I drew is that whatever I had going on with me had to be different than what was going on with you, because my experience from my own perception seemed to be different from what I observed. There was a guy who was my grand sponsor since 2011. He passed away recently. And Clancy was a guy who had a major impact on me in the time I spent with him. And I'll maybe share a little bit about a couple experiences I had, and one in particular. But he used to talk about this idea, a trap, really, that I, as the alcoholic, often did throughout my life. The trap of getting into this place where I cannot seem to match up the way I feel on the inside with the way I perceive all of you looking on the outside. It's like my raw, exposed emotions on the inside never quite measure up to how polished and put together all of you look on the outside. And that's the way I felt. But none of that really matters unless I'm like an alcoholic. And I think it's important to identify as an alcoholic. And turns out I got a really, really bad case. I have like, I got a bad case of alcoholism. To this day, you know, there are days where I feel like I'm skipping on a sunbeam with Jesus. And then there are days where I got to tell you, my thoughts, I mean, thank God there's no such thing as the thought police, right? Because certain days I'd be in trouble. You know, if you hooked up my mind to a monitor, scary things happen in there some days. And that still happens, you know, 9 years away from a drink. The only difference is today, I don't have to act on what I think. And if there was anybody, if we were like at a live meeting, I'd probably get there early and you know, cut it up with Steven and Phil. We'd be hanging out over by the coffee pot, you know, and maybe eating some cookies that I told myself I wouldn't eat, you know, probably more than I should be, and, you know, hearing stories. And we'd be eyeing the front door for newcomers. You know, we'd be scoping out anybody we didn't recognize. And maybe I get a chance to sit there and talk to you, you know, and invite you in. And if it was your first time at a meeting, maybe ask you if you'd ever been here before. Maybe ask you if you had a big book, and if you didn't, get you one. And try and welcome you in the way that I was welcomed in so many times. And on Zoom, I don't know. There's no way for me to know how many of us are making our approach. And I'm sure there's at least a couple of us in here. And I think any time that we have this experience in AA, I honestly believe I'm only ever talking really to two people, and two people that I am. The first person maybe that I'm talking to is someone who's making their approach to AA, maybe for the very first time, or like me for the umpteenth time. But it turns out that, and there were people in the group who pulled me aside and tried to nudge me in the right direction. And it seemed like they could see something about my disposition and behavior that I myself couldn't see. And the next thing you know, I wound up drunk. So if you're new or making your approach, welcome. So glad that you're here. And I hope, whether it's online or some other way, I get to sit with you and meet you and get to know you. But the reason I identify as an alcoholic, and maybe I'll talk a little bit about what it's come to mean to be an alcoholic, because that relationship has changed over time. I identify as an alcoholic really for a simple reason, or more like a combination of reasons. And I'm the kind of guy that when I introduce alcohol into my system in any form at all, I have little control over the amount I take. And see, I debated that fact with old timers and people in AA over the years that I was coming around, because I thought that reading said I had no control over the amount I take. And like, there was like one time out of 1,000 that I drank that I went out for 2 beers and did it on accident, right? Probably because I ran out of money or the bar closed. And I would always point to that night, like, you don't understand. Once upon a time, I went out for 2 drinks, I had 2 drinks and went home. And I would point to that evidence as something valid, that maybe I could control my drinking someday. But the truth is, if I match up all of my experience with alcohol, I've never been able to control my drinking. And the truth is, on the times where I kind of controlled it, I wasn't enjoying it. Because when I'm trying to control my drinking, I ain't drinking the way I want to. And when I'm trying to control it, I ain't enjoying it. And you know, when I'm enjoying it, there's no control at all. I'm letting the wheels fall off the bus. So I got that going on. But it's clear for sure, based on my history, that I have an abnormal reaction to alcohol, no doubt. Weird stuff happens to me. Things happen to me when I drink alcohol that didn't happen to many of my other friends. But that's only half the equation for me. I've got something else going on. And that's when you remove alcohol from my life and you get me physically sober, I'm eventually so uncomfortable that I become so restless, irritable, and discontent that I can't take it anymore. And my condition and my alcoholism gets on me in a way where it demands my attention. Like my sponsor talks about alcoholism like an itch that must be scratched, right? A disease that demands attention. And I know what that feels like. So while I have an abnormal reaction to alcohol, it turns out I have an equally or even more abnormal reaction to physical sobriety. So I'm stuck. And then I'm told here that if I got those two things going on, the answer isn't to stop drinking. I'm told that I may be suffering from a malady or a condition which only a spiritual experience would conquer. And when I came here, you might as well, when you're talking about that kind of stuff, you might as well have been talking about Chinese algebra or rocket science. Because although I had so much false intellectual pride, I thought I knew what you were getting at. It was so far over my head, I had no clue. And I had no clue that I had no clue. But it all started when I was this weird little kid. And like the best way to describe the way I was growing up is I'm like Newton's law of motion. I was like an object in motion that stayed in motion until it came in contact with a greater force. I'm a weird little kid. I grew up in the Midwest. I was temporarily a Kentucky Wildcat until I drank myself out of college in the first semester. We would often do some road trips over to near Kingsport, although I don't think I knew it at the time, going over to the Smoky Mountains, taking a little, some bottles of booze with us, puffing on a little bit of the devil's lettuce and, having a higher experience. I had some of that going on. And before that, when I was a kid, I was like this object in motion that stayed in motion until it came in contact with a greater force. And if I can describe for you like what it was like, I grew up in that little town in central Illinois. It's a little town right in between St. Louis and Chicago, a little town called Decatur. It's a farming and agricultural town. Its claim to fame is that it's the soybean capital of the world. I think it still holds that title. And like it's the former home of the Chicago Bears. And I remember there was this old wooden pathetic sign on the edge of town that like hadn't been painted in decades, and like tree branches had grown over it. And it was like former home of the Chicago. Nobody seemed to be impressed by that. And the town always smelled because of that soybean refinery. Everybody would sort of smirk and say, that's the smell of money. To me, it smelled like something else, but everybody said that's the smell of money. And I'm in that little town. And I think everything's okay until I discover that it's not okay. Like that thing that the alcoholic deals with to an extreme level, that self-awareness, but moreover self-awareness, that extreme self-focus, that I didn't know anything different than that town until I knew something different than that town. And I don't know if it was when I was 6, 8 years old, something like that, and we went on our first field trip, but I just remember going for the first time to Chicago, the big city of Chicago, And I just remember these images and these ideas of the old Chicago Board of Exchange building and people buzzing in and out of there. And it looked like whatever was going on in Chicago was like the center of life. Like people were, before they invented it, fear of missing out. Like I had the fear of missing out my whole life. I remember as a kid growing up playing, I'd come back from that field trip or whatever it was, and I remember I just upstairs, I wanted to be downstairs. When I was downstairs, I wanted to be upstairs. When I was playing baseball, I wanted to be playing soccer. When I was playing soccer, I wanted to be playing baseball. And I couldn't find a flow. And it just felt like that something was wrong. And so I got that deal going on, and this is the way that I am as a kid. The way that I've heard it described in AA, the idea of like feeling like you never fit in, I don't know. I don't know that I ever really tried to fit in. I was always the kind of kid that always wanted to try and stand out. Like maybe if I could just get enough accolades and approval from all of you, I could feel adequate and okay. Like when you score a perfect 100 on the test and you feel adequate momentarily, but by the next class or the next day, that effect had worn off. Maybe I was pushed pretty hard as a kid, and I developed a pretty good talent for playing soccer. I was fast and would play a lot, so I did that most of my growing up, and sometimes I'd get awards for that, and got to play in some pretty cool places and overseas. And I remember whenever I would achieve something, the effect would be fleeting. Like I'd win the game, or we'd get a trophy, and it would make me feel okay momentarily. But it was almost by the time I'd gotten that trophy and got back in the car to go home, I already felt like I knew it was a fluke. Like I'd never do it. I just got lucky, right? I wasn't good enough. I just got lucky. So I had that feeling. And that object in motion would stay in motion until it came in contact with two things that would set me on an alternative course of action that would change my life forever. And I'll share something with you only because it's been part of my journey. And I think it was a barrier or a blockage for me to come all the way into AA and sit all the way down. And it's that I grew up in an alcoholic household, and my old man was the hardest drinking guy I ever knew. He was on one hand my hero, and on the other hand, I watched him deteriorate right before my eyes. I remember, this is a guy who taught me how to throw and catch a baseball, taught me how to swing a baseball bat. He was a decorated pilot in Vietnam. You get him dressed up in his military uniform. The guy looked like $1 million. He was funny. He was charismatic. He was a trumpet player in a jazz band. He introduced me to Miles Davis and John Coltrane, music that I still love to this day. That man was my hero. He loved to restore old cars. And I remember, before his alcoholism had progressed all the way, I'd get to ride around with him, in one of those old cars. And I just loved that experience. But over time, my father was that description in the book that tells us that alcoholics that are chronic, we eventually may have brief periods of recovery, but they're always followed by even worse relapse. And I saw my old man kind of go down that path and deteriorate until ultimately, somebody got tired of somebody, he and my mother separated. And I experienced some things in that household that Bill writes about. He talks about children in an alcoholic household, the warped lives of blameless children. There was physical abuse, there was verbal abuse. But on the whole, I think there was also love. See, I would have told you growing up, and even into my 20s, that there was nothing good about my childhood. But the truth is, if I'm honest about it, and the work in Alcoholics Anonymous and the inventories have really rearranged the facts of my life. Sandy B has a great line that he used to say, and he said, the older you get in AA, the better your childhood gets. The longer you're sober, the better your childhood gets. And that's definitely my experience. And what I've tried to do with it is see it honestly for what it is. On one hand, not to minimize, and on the other hand, not to exaggerate. And those were the facts. And so my old man, he was living on his own at this time. And one day he came over to see me, told me he was going away for a while, which wasn't unusual. Except that day when he left me, he went home to this little studio apartment he was living in when my mom kicked him out. He sat down in an armchair, he put a gun to his chest, and he pulled the trigger. And I share with you that to share with you this. At 12 years old, I got no idea what to do with that. I don't even know what to do with that. And most of my life, I sort of minimized that occurrence. But today, having gone through the process in AA, I can tell you that what happened to my father, for an alcoholic like me, it's just the next thing. It's just the next thing. I believe my father ended up in a place where I would ultimately end up, a place that Bill writes about in A Vision for You. I think the alcoholic, the chronic alcoholic, ends up often at the end of a hallway, and they're faced with two equally unacceptable alternatives. On one hand, they can try to go on living life as they've been living life, trying to blot out that intolerable existence one more time, killing themselves on the installment plan. And that at some point becomes so unbearable, I can't do that anymore. But on the other hand, the alternative is equally unacceptable. Go on living sober. How do you live sober? Right? How do you do that? And I think that's what happened to my old man. And I think all that happens to alcoholics in that situation, we just want out. We just want door number 3, right? We just want out. And some of us make the supreme sacrifice. And so that happened when I was 12 years old. And the other thing that would happen is, for the first time in my life, the most instant and perfect cure from what I suffer from came in contact with my soul sickness for the first time. So like right after my old man died, my mother, trying to keep the household together, was taking on more hours at work and working overtime. She was a telephone operator. And so she started working the night shift to try and keep food on the table. And so the house would be sort of empty and clear in the evenings. And my sister was a little older, and she started throwing these beer parties. And, I'm not a complete idiot. I know a good opportunity for blackmail when I see one. And, when you're growing up and you reach a certain age, like when I was like 10 and 11, man, I saw my sister and all her bratty friends, and I hated them. They were like my arch enemies. But by the time I'm turning 12 and 13, some of her dumb friends don't look so bad anymore. And a few of them I kind of want to get to know, And so I cornered my sister and I said, listen, if you don't let me in on the action, I'm going to rat you out to mom. So the next time she threw a party, somebody thought it would be a good idea to get the little brother drunk. And they passed her on one of those plastic Solo cups. And I think it was some kind of like trailer park, like punch. I remember they put like this wine, this Boone's Farm wine. There wasn't a grape in the ingredients. It was just like terrible. I remember they had this, I don't even think they make this stuff anymore, but it was something called Purple Passion. It was like pure grain alcohol with food coloring. And they put a few more things in there, and they passed that cup around, and I just took it. And I don't even think I knew intellectually what it was going to do. I don't even think I knew it was going to get me drunk. I didn't even know what it was. I just saw everybody else doing it, and I wanted in on the action. And I drank that cup, and that alcohol, it went inside of me, deep down, and wrapped itself around every raw, exposed nerve that I had. And up until that point, the way life seemed to me, it was like I was living inside of this fishbowl, and I'm in here all by myself, and I'm like looking through a filter of glass at the world. Because see, I'd never been here. I'd never been with you. I'd never been where Bill describes as the fourth dimension. I had been living in some sort of simulation of reality. Really, my perception and commentary about what was going on is where I lived. I lived up here in the control center. And when I took that drink, all of a sudden, the walls on that fishbowl evaporated. I didn't care anymore that I was growing up on the wrong side of the tracks, or that my old man killed himself. I didn't care so much anymore about the conditions of my life. It felt like for the first time ever I could breathe. It felt like for the first time ever I could come out and play. And that would be the first time where I had gotten relief from a condition I so desperately needed relief from. It was the first time something desperately inside of me that needed to be reconciled was able to be reconciled. And I felt like I had arrived to a place I'd never been before. And the way alcohol would make me feel was so good that the way I would be without it would never be good enough again. And so I'll submit something, if you're new or making your approach, only because it was true for me. If we were having that conversation by the coffee pot before the meeting starts, and we were talking, you might give me your story on why you're in some AA meeting in a church basement, right? How you got here. And you'd give me a story. And when I came here, I had a story, and I had reasons why I was here. But for me, I'll submit this only because it was true. The reason that I thought I came to AA, or the reason I thought I was here, turned out to be very, very different than the reason I'm actually here. Reason I thought I was here turned out to be very, very different from the reason I'm actually here. And some things had to be rearranged. And I often look back at that point of my first drink, and the transformation that happened. And I had my first drink at the age of 12, and I had my last drink at the age of 33. And in between that time, I tried every pill, powder, potion, and lotion to fix my emotions you can get your hands on. I mean, I went all in. I was like a billy goat. Whatever came across the conveyor belt, I would try it first and ask you what it was later. But it always started and ended with my first love, alcohol. It always started and ended with alcohol. And in order for this process in Alcoholics Anonymous to take hold for me, I had to rearrange some things. And I remember hearing for the first time something that caught my attention. You know, I'm a guy who would come to AA and be so trapped in my mind that so many great and well-meaning people would try and help me, but they couldn't get through. It's like I had this invisible shield that would just take every bit of good advice and every bit of care and love and just push it away. And I remember I heard Clancy say something once that nailed me. He was talking about this idea about alcoholism as a disease of perception, and the idea that a chronic alcoholic like me, as we read in the doctor's opinion and as Bill describes throughout the book, but a chronic alcoholic like me, he said, is not someone whose problem is alcohol. He said a chronic alcoholic like me is someone whose answer or solution is alcohol. And God, that made so much sense to me, because in spite of all of the police reports and the arrest reports and the arguments with family, with ex-girlfriends, with business partners, where they were all coming at me about my drinking, it's like I couldn't find the words to explain to them, you don't understand, that's not my problem. I've got something else going on. And so a chronic alcoholic like me is someone whose answer is alcohol. So if alcohol is my answer, what is the question? What's the question? And that's what I'd go on to discover. So if anybody ever played chess, like I did growing up, it's one of the things that I got into for a little while. One of the ways they'll teach you how to play chess is they'll start with like these in-game scenarios, and then you work backwards to see how you got there. And so from the first time I had my drink at the age of 12 until I had my last drink at the age of 33, my alcoholism progressed. I'm here to tell you that I'm not one of these guys that bewails alcohol. I'm here to tell you that if alcohol had the same effect on me that it did when I was 12, I'd still be doing it. But eventually the price tag of my drinking got unbearable. So this weekend I'm visiting family and my girlfriend in Orlando. So I'm up in Orlando. And here, Orlando's known for its great theme parks, you know, Disney World and Universal Studios and all that good stuff. So the way to describe my drinking throughout my life and how it progressed is that when I started drinking, it was like the first time you walk into Disney World. It's like, whoa, where am I? There's like 5 different parks and endless roller coasters. There's like all the food you could ever want. It's like, I can live here, man. Like this is amazing. And drinking for me was like being in Disney World for a while. And then one day I start drinking, and it's not like Disney anymore. It's more like one of those shady roadside carnivals in like a department store parking lot. And you like look at the rides. You're not sure if you should get on them, but you do anyway. And so my drinking was like that for a while. And then eventually the party goes away so much that like there's no more amusement park. It's just like one of those motorized horses you see outside of Walmart that you're sitting on, rocking back and forth. And then eventually even somebody walks up to that motorized horse and pulls the plug out of the wall, and even that goes away. And so it just takes me to the end. But if I had the juice to drink like I could when I was 12, I'd still be doing it. But the price tag got so high. And the place I ended up eventually, after a series of geographics and trying to get sober, I would find myself in Miami. I'd done most of my drinking out in the hitting bottom capital of the world, Las Vegas. And out there, my alcoholism progressed to a depth that I never imagined my life would enter. It was a place where everything of value in my life had been taken away. You could turn around 360 degrees in my life. And like Clancy says, you could look in every direction and there was no friendly direction. Every bridge, every relationship, every hope, every dream, every ambition, every aspiration, I had pawned and traded them all for one more drink. And I never thought it could get worse until it did. In a last-ditch effort, I had this friend that I'd helped early on. I'd put him into business. And he'd heard a little bit about my story and knew that I was down and out. And so he tried to fish me out of Vegas because, of course, Vegas is the problem, right? And so he let me sleep in a spare bedroom for a night. And he was a wine collector. Bad idea. He put me in a spare bedroom and I cleaned out like a half a case of I don't even remember what it was, but it was expensive and French. And I mowed through it like I was drinking, draft beer. And I had to go back and make amends for that at some point. I really wish I would have drank the cheaper bottles because I don't remember any of it. And so after that, like, he kind of gets the picture that something's going on with me that he has no experience with. And I get myself set up in this little, really what it was this little box in the sky in Brickell that was overlooking the Atlantic Ocean, but you wouldn't have known it because the shades had been drawn for months. The only outfit I could bear to put on was an old dirty bathrobe because my faculties had begun to fail. I would try and put pants on and I would fall over. I'd wake up jaundiced and gaunt and 30 pounds lighter than I am today, bruised, not knowing how it happened. And I'd put I'd drape that bathrobe over me and I'd go over to that kitchen sink and I'd lean over that kitchen sink and I'd dry heave until it felt like my eyeballs were going to pop out of my head. And, isn't it weird that, when you wear a bathrobe indoors, you feel luxurious, but when you wear one out in public, you look like a psychopath? Like, I've never matched that up because I'm a bathrobe. I love bathrobes. You just put them on. And then I'd put that bathrobe on, and I had this old pair of running shoes. It was like this. I ran the New York Marathon one time because I knew that if I could train for 9 months without drinking, I would solve my alcohol problem. So I did. I trained for 9 months, didn't drink. I put hundreds of miles between me and the next drink. And I remember running that marathon. It was an amazing experience. You go through all 5 boroughs and you end up coming back from the Bronx down into Central Park and you finish. And I remember being smugly satisfied that I had 9 months under my belt. I just ran a marathon. It's the United States of America. By God, I've earned a drink. And I think they had one of these like sponsors at the race and they were handing out like free samples of beer. I finished that race on a Sunday and I was staying in New York the rest of the week. I'd made plans to see friends and loved ones that I hadn't seen for a long time, see all the museums, catch the sights. I had a couple of drinks and the race ended like on 86th and Central Park West and I was staying in Columbus Circle. By the time I got back, I had drank my way from bar to bar back to Columbus Circle. I went into that hotel room and I didn't leave for 4 days. I blew everybody off. And after having not drank for 9 months, within one afternoon, I'm worse off than I began. And so anyway, I've still got those running shoes because, after all, I'm going to get back in the gym someday, right? I'm going to do it. And I had fished the laces out of those running shoes and they turned into these kind of perverse pair of house slippers. And I'd shove my feet in there. And I'd go down to the lobby of my building to this bodega where I'd buy more alcohol. And see, I never wanted to become a monster. I never, in Miami where I live, you'll be around the downtown area by Overtown and on Brickell Avenue sometimes. And you'll see alcoholics and people living on the street, walking up and down, pacing, like talking to themselves, right? I never wanted to become that guy, but I became that guy, walking up and down the street, talking to myself. And you know what that person's doing? They're just trying to figure it all out, right? They're just trying to figure it all out. And there I am trapped in my mind trying to figure it all out. The only problem is the only person that doesn't know the crazy person is a crazy person is the crazy person. And I'm the crazy person. And so I'm in that state and I'm drinking to blot out my existence one day at a time, right? And God sends us angels in the strangest ways. If you ever detoxed off booze, I don't recommend it. It's an ugly experience, you know. It's not fun. You know, I heard voices, I had a few seizures, and I sweat a lot, right? I got hot. And so I got the AC in my condo down to like, you know, like a meat locker, right? But I'm still hot and sweating. No, it never occurs to me that I'm detoxing from alcohol. I think my AC's broken. And I'm cranking that thing down to like trying to get it down to Arctic levels, you know, and but I'm still sweating and I'm hot. So obviously there's something wrong with my AC. So in a blackout, I guess that's where I like to make my appointments and do my business, in a blackout, so I forget all about it. And I guess I had called this AC repair guy to come fix my air conditioning because I'm hot, right? And God sends us angels in the strangest ways. And one day, this guy, Fernando, AC repair guy in Miami, Cuban guy, apparently walks into my unit because I'd made an appointment for him to come, and he finds me unresponsive on the kitchen floor. Now, I don't know on that day if Fernando hadn't shown up, if I would have ended up like my friend Joey and choked on my own vomit. Maybe that would have happened. Or like other alcoholics I know, maybe I would have never woken up and I would have slipped into an alcoholic coma. I certainly had enough alcohol in my system to do that. I don't know. But when he came in, his apparently fate entered through the form of his work boot, because I guess he thought he found a dead guy, and he just started kicking me. And it must have been like one of those prank shows in the funeral home, like where the guy sits up real fast in the casket, because I guess I popped up off the floor and I was like, you know, look by, ain't it grand, the wind stopped blowing. And I took him right over to the AC closet, poured myself another drink, and kept it moving, you know, because that's what I do. I drink. And eventually, if you drink the way I drank, you're going to find yourself with moments of clarity. You're going to find yourself with the truth of your reality is going to be more in your face than your commentary about it. And when I popped off the floor that day, I saw myself in a way that I was previously unable to. Chuck C describes it as a place where you end up where there's nothing left between you and you. See, all the excuses, my old man who was abusive, who killed himself, my mother who let it all happen, who I persecuted for all that, the wrong family, the wrong town, the wrong place, the wrong school, all my problems. Well, all those problems that were my problems, they hadn't been in my life for years. So what do you do when you solve all your problems and you still got a problem? You got a really big problem, right? Because I guess the first step of getting out of jail is realizing you're in jail in the first place. And on that day, for whatever reason, I had a moment of clarity and I could see my condition. And yeah, I think what I want to share a little bit about in the last few minutes that we have is my journey from that point forward. And more specifically around sponsorship and how it's changed my life, and how I'd be put in the path of some people who would set me on a course that would completely transform everything that I thought AA was. Because see, I'd been in and around AA by that time for over 5 years. And isn't the greatest arrogance that we have? I was teasing I have a buddy who I'm going to meet later, and he wanted to go hang out tonight. And I said, "Oh no, I'm going to hang out with Phil and the guys in Tennessee tonight." He goes, yeah. He goes, no, just have somebody else cover and skip it. He goes, AA will be here tomorrow. Now he was joking, but the answer was, well, yeah, AA will be here tomorrow, but you might not be, right? But you might not be, and isn't that the great arrogance? Where I'd be sitting in AA, and you over time, you hang out here for any period of time. You see people come and never come back. You see people that you've known and had coffee with, they die. And isn't it the great arrogance that I think I can walk out the door and that I'm guaranteed to find it again? Right? But I had that arrogance. But something happened to me at that time, and I didn't know. I just knew that maybe I could get drunk another time. But I didn't know if I would this time there'd be another Fernando. I didn't know. So I did what I did for about the first year and a half of my sobriety. And there were some great men that came across and helped me. A guy that I love who really impacted my life, and I became really close. He kind of sponsored me for that first year or so until I got my current sponsor. And we would meet every Saturday morning out on the sand on South Beach off Ocean Drive. And we'd have this Saturday morning beach meeting. And he would sit with me and talk to me, and we'd have coffee after. And then he and I we started doing some business stuff together, so I got a little too close to him. But he was a guy who impacted my life, and we became close, kind of like family. He lived up in New York City, and he just came to Miami as a second home. And over last year, I spent about a week a month up in New York, and we became super close. And he ended up passing away in April. And he and I had gone through a lot of stuff together, but I knew that when that time came and he passed on, that our relationship was stronger than it had ever been. And the impact that he had on me allowed me to be where I am today. And the last thing I'll share, and then I'll wrap it up, is about a year and a half sober, I'm on my way out of AA again. I'm leaving. And I know the symptoms of leaving. You know, when you're in a meeting and the words aren't jumping off the page anymore, where everyone's irritating you. I would sit in discussion meetings and it just seemed like the same people shared every week. I already knew what he was going to say. There was this guy, he was this old timer. He'd say the same thing every time. He would say, I went from hugging the commode to hugging my grandkids. And everybody would like laugh and clap. Like, he's going to say it again. And today I love that guy. But the thing is, in AA, the old timers, if you're not on the beam and you're struggling, they're here to comfort the disturbed and disturb the comfortable, right? And I was the guy who needed some disturbing so I could make some moves. And about a year and a half in, I was on my way out, and I was in Las Vegas at the time with this girlfriend. And I knew I was going to drink, but I couldn't do it in Vegas because if I drank, I didn't know if I'd make it back to Miami, because I know once I start, I don't stop. So I made a pact with myself that I would go finish the trip in Vegas, and I would get relief when I got back to Miami. And just knowing I was going to drink in a few days gave me a sense of relief. And my mind was crazy, and it was on me. I was going nuts. And in a last-ditch effort, I reached out to central office to look for a meeting. And they put me in touch with this meeting on a Friday night in Vegas. And if you've ever been to Vegas, in between the Las Vegas Strip and Old Vegas on Fremont Street is this tall hotel tower called the Stratosphere. And a few blocks east of that tower, there's a street corner, 6th and St. Louis, and there's a Lutheran church on that street corner. And there was a meeting Friday night that they'd sent me to. And I was going to that meeting the way that I went to most meetings in those days. I went 5 minutes late, because if you go 5 minutes late to a meeting, you don't have to deal with anybody. You don't have to run into people like Phil and Steve and these AA do-gooders who are just going to like ruin your day. Except I made a mistake. I didn't go to that meeting 5 minutes late. I was at that meeting 55 minutes early. And you know the kind of people that are at AA meeting 55 minutes, AA fanatics. And I'm like halfway across the parking lot and they make eye contact. I want to turn around and go to my car, but it's too late. They've already spotted me. And I walk up to that meeting, and there's a guy in a hallway, and it's this cold, like December Vegas night, and he has an overcoat on. He looked like an undertaker, which was pretty fitting for the way that I felt. Anyway, he put his hand out and said, "Hey, my name's Bob. How are you?" And that guy would set me on a course of actions. He would push me into an extreme series of actions I didn't believe in, but actions that gave me results I couldn't deny. And the more I began to take those actions, I began to do things I'd never done before. So I began to have an experience I'd never had before. And through those actions, I had what Bill would describe as a spiritual awakening, a profound alteration of my reaction to life, a complete displacement of old ideas, beliefs, and attitudes that allowed me to arrive in my life, maybe for the first time ever. But I hope I never get complacent, because the problem with the spiritual awakening? The problem with the spiritual awakening is that you can fall back to sleep. If I stop doing the deal, I can fall back to sleep. And so it's been an interesting time, and I know that we'll all emerge stronger than ever. It may be different, but I think those groups like this group will be stronger than ever. And I hope that we'll continue to brew the coffee and leave the light on for people like me when we show up. And I'm thankful for guys like Phil and Steven who invite me to hang out with all of you on a Saturday night. And I look forward to getting to know some of you when all this is beyond us. And thanks so much for listening.